The 1970s were a wild time when many actresses made headlines by going totally naked on screen. But did they risk it all just for fame, or were they forced into it by a male-dominated industry? We're about to dive into the stories of 13 actresses who bared it all, and how their bold choices left a lasting impact on Hollywood. Jane Fonda took on the role of Bree Daniels in Clute, 1971, with a powerful mix of personal change and political awakening. Bree Daniels, an upscale New York call girl who knew how to play men like a pro, wasn't just another character for Fonda, it was a statement. After starring in Barbarella, where people expected her to be a sexy, playful figure again, Fonda surprised everyone. Bree was tough, damaged, and far from anyone's fantasy. Now, let's talk about the scenes that grabbed everyone's attention. The ones where Bree strips down more than just her clothes. These weren't just typical nude scenes for shock value. They were raw, uncomfortable, and brutally honest. Fonda used her vulnerability to challenge what it meant to be a woman on screen. In a time when women were expected to smile and look pretty for the camera, Fonda showed that Bree's nudity wasn't about being attractive. It was about revealing the deep scars of her soul and showing the complex struggles between power and submission. Fonda's performance didn't just win her an Oscar, it broke the mold, proving that a woman could be both strong and fragile while defying Hollywood's expectations. With Bree Daniels, Fonda wasn't just acting, she was making a bold statement. Maria Schneider's role in Last Tango in Paris, 1972, was more like jumping off a cliff, with Marlon Brando waiting at the bottom. But there was no safety net. The movie was full of raw, intense emotions and explicit content that left audiences either glued to their seats or running out of the theater. Schneider, who was barely out of her teens, was pushed into a role that demanded everything from her, including parts of herself she wasn't ready to give. Here's the troubling part. Schneider later revealed that the most famous scene wasn't fully consensual. The experience left her deeply scarred, turning what should have been her big break into a painful memory. Even though the movie became a classic, it's hard to watch it without feeling the weight of what happened to her. Schneider gave an unforgettable performance, but the cost was too high. The film may be remembered, but so is the trauma she endured. Charlotte Rampling didn't just step into The Night Porter, 1974, she dove into the darkness with her eyes wide open. The film, which explores a Holocaust survivor's twisted relationship with her former Nazi tormentor, is like a bad dream that sticks with you. Rampling's character wasn't just following a story, she was plunging into a deep psychological swamp, pulling us in with her. The movie tackles some very taboo subjects, and Rampling's fearless performance makes sure you don't come out of it untouched. Every scene is a balancing act between horror and intimacy, forcing you to face the darkest sides of human desire. It's the kind of film that leaves a lasting impression, whether you're ready for it or not. Rampling didn't just play the role, she owned it, scars and all. Pam Greer was a big deal in movies during the 1970s. She starred in films like Coffee, 1973, and Foxy Brown, 1974, showing Hollywood a kind of woman they hadn't seen before. Greer didn't just act in these movies, she owned them. She played tough characters instead of the usual weak female roles. Greer sometimes appeared nude in her films, but it wasn't just for shock value. She was making a point. In an industry that often used black women's bodies without respecting their talent, Greer was taking control. She showed that she was powerful and confident without needing anyone's approval. By doing this, Greer was changing how Hollywood saw women of color. She wasn't just following the rules, she was making new ones. Pam Greer showed everyone that she could tell her own story, her own way. Susan Sarandon's first big movie was The Rocky Horror Picture Show in 1975. This movie was really weird and different, but people loved it. Sarandon played Janet Weiss, who seemed like a nice, normal girl at first. But when she got thrown into a crazy world full of strange costumes and weird stuff, she fit right in. In one part of the movie, Sarandon's character takes off her clothes. This wasn't just to get attention. It was Sarandon's way of showing everyone that she wasn't going to be the kind of actress people expected. She was breaking free from the good girl roles that Hollywood wanted her to play. It was like Sarandon was telling everyone, if you think this is crazy, just wait and see what else I can do. This movie was just the start for her. After this, Sarandon kept surprising people by playing all sorts of different and interesting characters in her movies. By the late 1970s, Brigitte Bardot was more than just a beautiful actress. She was the face of 70s sexual revolution. Hollywood wanted her to be just a pretty face, but Bardot had different plans. She didn't just push the limits of what people thought was okay, she completely broke through them. In her movie Don Juan, or If Don Juan Were a Woman, 1973, Bardot played a character who was more than just attractive. She turned an old story about a man who seduced women into a story about a woman in charge. Bardot wasn't just there to look good, she was making people think differently about who has power in relationships. Bardot wasn't just famous for being sexy, she was leading the way to a new time when women weren't just there to look pretty. She showed that women could be the ones in control. In the movie Don't Look Now, 1973, Julie Christie played a woman whose child had died. There's a famous scene where she and Donald Sutherland's character have sex. This scene was so real that people still talk about it today. But this scene wasn't just there to shock people or to be sexy. It showed two people trying to feel close again after losing their child. It wasn't like most love scenes in movies. Instead, it showed how people might really act when they're sad and trying to connect. The director, Nicholas Roeg, planned this scene carefully. He wanted to show how the characters were trying to feel better even though they were still very sad. By the end of the scene, we see that being close to someone isn't just about bodies, it's also about showing your true feelings. This is why people still find this scene powerful, even though the movie is pretty old now. Sylvia Christie became really famous for her movie Emmanuelle in 1974. This movie was very sexy and started a whole series of similar films, but it wasn't just about being sexy for no reason. Christie played Emmanuelle in a way that was both innocent and brave. Her character showed how ideas about sex were changing. The movie pushed the limits of what could be shown in regular theaters. Emmanuelle wasn't just another movie. It was part of a big change in how people thought about sex. It challenged old-fashioned ideas and showed that movies could talk about sex more openly. This film didn't just cause a little stir, it made a huge impact. After Emmanuelle, movies about sex and relationships were never quite the same. Liv Alman was already a very good actress when she starred in Scenes from a Marriage in 1973, but this role made her even more famous. In this movie, there are some scenes where Alman doesn't have clothes on, but these scenes aren't there to be shocking. Instead, they help show how the character is feeling inside. The movie is about a marriage that's falling apart, and Alman's acting makes us really understand what that feels like. Watching Alman in this movie is like watching someone teach a class on great acting. She doesn't just play a character, she makes us feel everything the character is going through. We can sense her sadness, her confusion, and the times when she feels a little bit hopeful. This is why many people still say Alman is one of the best actresses ever. Natasha Kinsky became really famous when she starred in Tess in 1979. This movie, directed by Roman Polanski, was a big deal. Kinsky played Tess Derbyfield, a character who has a really tough life. The movie shows how hard the world can be for women like Tess. There are scenes where Kinsky doesn't have clothes on, but these aren't just there to show her body. They help us see how vulnerable Tess is, but also how strong she is inside. Kinsky didn't just act like Tess, she became Tess. She made the audience feel everything Tess was feeling, especially the sad parts. This role didn't just make Kinsky famous, it made her a star. After this movie, everyone wanted to work with Kinsky. They liked her not just because she looked good on camera, but because she was a powerful actress. When you watched her, you forgot you were watching a movie. That's how good she was. If there was ever an actress who could take on a role with as much force as a sledgehammer, it was Glenda Jackson. A great example is her role in The Music Lovers 1970. Directed by Ken Russell, known for his wild storytelling, the movie is less of a biography and more of a wild, dreamlike take on the troubled life of composer Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Jackson plays his wife, a woman losing her mind as she gets caught up in her husband's genius and his inner struggles. Now let's address the obvious, the nude scenes. These aren't just for show, they're intense, raw, and make you uncomfortable, showing how her character's mind is falling apart. Jackson doesn't just act, she explodes on screen, giving a performance so fearless that it leaves you stunned. It's the kind of acting that makes you wonder if she's playing a part or actually living out some dark reality on camera. She wasn't in it for the awards or easy roles. She wanted to break the rules, and she shattered them completely. Before Helen Mirren became the queen of every historical drama, she was making headlines in ways that would shock today's gossip magazines. Let's go back to Caligula, 1979, a movie packed with more controversy than most films ever have. The movie? It's a chaotic mix of explicit scenes, power struggles, and enough behind-the-scenes drama for a dozen documentaries. Critics didn't just dislike Caligula, they absolutely destroyed it. But Mirren? She didn't just survive the mess, she thrived in it. She jumped into the madness with no fear, and her performance in this wild Roman drama was bold and daring. Even though the movie was a disaster, Mirren shined like a diamond in the rough. She wasn't just acting, she was taking on roles that most people would have run away from. That fearless attitude in her early career, it set the stage for the Helen Mirren we know today, the one who can play anyone from a queen to a crazy person and make it look easy. Before Margo Kidder became famous as Lois Lane in Superman, she was already making waves in a different way with movies like Sisters, 1972. Directed by Brian De Palma, this psychological thriller had Kidder taking on two roles, diving deep into a twisted world of identity crises and madness. Kidder didn't just show up for the job, she fully committed. The movie's unsettling vibe wasn't just because of the plot, it was also because of the raw intensity Kidder brought to her performance. Some scenes included nudity that wasn't just there for show. It was shocking, uncomfortable, and crucial to the film's creepy feel. Kidder wasn't aiming to be Hollywood's next sweetheart. She wanted to break that mold. This role let her flip the script, showing that she was all about pushing limits and embracing the wild, strange energy of 1970s cinema. As Hollywood keeps evolving, the courage and artistry of these trailblazers remind us all of the power of film to challenge, provoke, and transform. And that, my friends, is the naked truth. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our other videos of beautiful actresses on the end screen below.